All right. Welcome, everyone. Good to be back after a little hiatus for Passover. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
If anyone would like to sponsor a class, it's $100 for a class. And you have the merit of bringing Torah to Jews in Erie, and as well as far beyond, because it's going on YouTube. So like anybody can watch it. You don't know who would gain from such a thing and how they will gain. It can have effects for generations, literally positive effects. And also with the sponsorship, we get to have delicious food, little snacks and goodies. We got this vanilla chai stuff. It's good stuff. Like a bracha first. Answer Amen.
Amen.
Okay, let's get into it. You thought we were done with Passover. Passover's done, or let's look at the summer now. Nope, we're not done with Passover. Okay. The Omer, a chametz transformation. Before Passover, we scrub our houses clean of all leavened bread. Just so we can be on the same page here. When we talk about leavened bread, throughout tonight's class, we're going to use the word chametz as the Hebrew word for leavened bread. Leavened bread product, crackers, bread, pitas. So the word is chametz. Yet just a few weeks later, chametz becomes a most important element of the Holy Temple service. Why the transformation? What does it represent in the journey of the soul? The next class is based on a talk delivered by the Rebbe in springtime 1954. Here's a little introduction. Just a few days ago, we concluded the Passover holiday, a festival which necessitates extensive preparations. The most important mitzvah of the holiday, alongside eating matzah on the Seder night, is the commandment to rid our homes of any crumbs of chametz, leavened bread. If you attended a Passover event at any Chabad center, you probably heard about the deeper meaning of chametz versus matzah, which represents ego versus humility. Chametz, which rises, represents our ego, while matzah, which is flat, represents humility. Exactly 7 weeks after Passover, we celebrate the festival of Shavuot, or Shavuos. Surprisingly, the sacrifice associated with this holiday, which is brought in the temple, when the temple is standing in Jerusalem, it's no longer standing temporarily, they would offer sacrifices. So the sacrifice associated with this holiday is specifically one that is made from chametz. What happened? How does something as intimidating and negative as chametz suddenly become material for the most sacred of services? In this talk, the Rebbe speaks about the spiritual journey of a Jew. The humility that we experience through Passover is only a beginning. The journey continues through the counting of the Omer, which we'll talk about in a minute, and culminates with the holiday of Shavuos, when we are commanded to serve God specifically with our ego. Okay, so we're starting on page 4 in your booklet, section 8, converting a prohibition into an obligation. We're going to build up a question here. We'll start with the prohibition of chametz on Passover. Elliot, can you go ahead, source 1.
For 7 days you must eat matzot, and the 7th day shall be a festival to Hashem. Matzot must be eaten these 7 days. No chametz may be seen in your possession, and no leaven may be seen in all your boundaries.
Excellent. So this is the verses in the Torah which where God commands us to both eat matzah on the first night of Passover, as well as to not have any chametz or eat any chametz throughout the 7 days of Passover. So let's move on to the offering of the 2 loaves. This, we're going to jump 49 days ahead, 7 weeks after Passover, to the holiday of Shavuot. Barry, can you read source 2? It's Leviticus chapter 23, verses 15 through 17.
You shall count from the day following the Passover holiday, when you brought the Omer offering 7 complete weeks, until the day after the 7th week. You shall count 50 days. And then you shall present a new meal offering to God. From your settlements bring 2 loaves of bread as a wave offering. They shall be made of 2/10 of an ephah measurement of wheat meal, and shall be baked as leavened bread. They are the first harvest offering to God.
Excellent, thank you. So after the, quote, day of rest that the verse refers to, which is referring to Passover in this case, the Omer offering, certain sacrifice called the Omer sacrifice, was brought in the temple. There's then a mitzvah to count 49 days, which we still do today. And on the 50th day, to bring another grain offering baked into 2 loaves of bread. The Torah stresses that this offering needs to be leavened. It needs to be chametz, as we just read in the verse. In the Hebrew, it's chametz te'afena, should be baked as chametz. This is a startling departure from the norm, as all other grain offerings throughout the year were made out of unleavened matzah, including the showbread, the lechem hapanim, which was on display all week. There was never any chametz to be found in the temple besides for this sacrifice of the 2 loaves. There's one other exception, was the Thanksgiving offering, which included 40 loaves of bread, 10 of which were made as chametz. However, that sacrifice was a personal sacrifice. The Shavuot offering of 2 loaves is the only communal sacrifice to be made out of chametz. So we have this kind of this weird shift. I want to ask him pointedly in a second, that Passover, no chametz, no leavened bread, out, only matzah. We'll see what the representation is in a minute. We mentioned earlier about ego and humility. And 49 days later, the holiday of Shavuot, we're commanded to, as part of the sacrifice, to specifically make 2 loaves of bread that are made out of chametz. And this is the only communal sacrifice throughout the entire year we have chametz. Throughout the year, they're all unleavened bread. Let's see source 3. This is the Sefer HaChinuch. This is a book which compiled all the mitzvahs of the Torah, and this is mitzvah number 307. This is a description of the 2 loaves offering. Michael, can you help with that? Page 5.
They would do as follows. They would bring 3 seah of new wheat and smooth them and pound them just like all meal offerings, and grind them and make 2 loaves from them. Each loaf was 7 handbreadths long, 4 handbreadths wide, and 4 fingers tall. They were square. They were baked on the day before the holiday, and on the morrow after their waving, they were eaten by the priests on that day and half the night.
Okay. Thank you. So these loaves were rectangular, 7 handbreadths by 4 handbreadths with protrusions on the corners, 4 fingerbreadths high. With much pomp and ceremony, the loaves would be waved, moved up and down and side to side, and they're given to the Kohen, the priest of the temple, to eat, with 1 loaf given to the high priest and 1 to all the other Kohanim. They were obligated to eat it inside the temple courtyard and to finish it before midnight. Source for this from the Babylonian Talmud, Menachot, page 62. The Talmud tells us exactly how the loaves were waved and what this brought to the world. Shrek, can you go ahead with that?
With a 2-loaf offering, what did the Kohen do? He would extend it toward each of the 4 directions of the skies, and then bring it back. And then he would raise it upward and lower it downward. Said Rabbi Hama Bar Ukva, he waved it back and forth to all 4 directions, to hold back the harmful winds, and he would raise and lower it to hold it back, lower it to hold back the harmful dews.
Right, thank you. I don't know if you have it. I don't think you do. There's a picture here of oh, you have it. Okay. On the next page. But a representation of this ceremony of waving the loaves on Shavuot. You can see the Kohen on top of the altar. There's the Levites standing there blowing trumpets and playing harps. Okay.
And the lamb.
The lamb of the sacrifice, right? Right. Okay.
And so what are these Cohens doing there? What are they? Is that the bread they're holding?
Possibly, I'm
Or
not
is that
sure.
is that the Keteres?
I don't think it's Keturah. It would be on a different altar,
okay.
a smaller altar. Good question. What that is though? It might be the bread, but I don't think the bread was flat. It's specifically, what you're saying it's chametz, right?
Right.
So you think it would stick out a little more. Good question. We'll have to figure that out. Okay. Page 6 in your books. How chametz became a mitzvah? There's the Rebbe's question. Between Passover and Shavuot, we count the Omer, which means that there are 3 time periods: Passover, the Omer period, followed by Shavuot. The distinctions between them are: on Passover, chametz is forbidden. During the Omer period, chametz is permitted. We're allowed to eat bread. On Shavuot, its consumption is not only permitted, it's a commandment. The 2 loaves were specifically made out of chametz. This raises the question: if chametz is forbidden on Passover, how does it suddenly become an article of a mitzvah with 2 loaves specifically of chametz? Meaning, seemingly, when we're saying that when God tells us not to eat chametz on Passover, there's a problem with chametz, as we'll see momentarily what the spiritual significance of that is. So if there's an issue with it, how does it shift from being an issue to something permitted to something that's required?
Well, isn't it traditionally the time in the land of Israel when the grain harvest would be happening?
The harvest. Yeah,
Yeah, so the freshest grains would be coming up like around that time that they'd be making into chametz.
right. But think of it from the Torah's perspective, right? We're commanded to not have any chametz. We're done with the holiday. Now it's permitted. Just a few relative days later, suddenly it's a mitzvah to have it's a commandment to have chametz. So you're saying so the harvest that's the harvest time, so people are making bread anyway.
Well, not just anyway, but then, it all coincides because Hashem knows that's when that bread is going to come up, and in that 49-day time, and then, well, and that's not they didn't just have one kind of wheat. There were many different kinds of wheat that would bear fruit like throughout the Count of Omer. Traditionally in the land of Israel, like the climate would,
Right.
So it just seems like a really opportune time to be, grateful for the grain that Hashem provides, and especially because of all the dew, as it said, that provided for that grain.
Right. Okay, so let's see if that plays a significance into this discussion. That's a very interesting point that Eli is bringing up, because the three holidays, three major holidays on the Jewish calendar, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, the Torah describes them with interesting names. The Passover is called Chag HaAviv, the holiday of the, what's the right translation for that? Blossoming or blooming. I could be wrong in the translation. The Shavuot is called Chag HaKatzir, the festival of the harvest, right? And the Sukkot is called the Chag HaAsif, the festival of the gathering. You gather the grain from the field. So let's see if that plays it over there. Okay. Section B, from belief to real transformation. Let's first explain the spiritual difference between chametz and matzah. Go ahead, Elliot, page 7, the explanation.
The explanation: chametz represents ego and haughtiness and logic, while matzah represents the opposite. It is called poor man's bread, as it has no self-importance and no taste.
All right. Thank you. So the Rebbe notes two metaphors implied by the contrast of matzah versus chametz. Chametz portrays self-worth, not self-worth that it's important, like there's two different types of self-worth. There's self-worth where you understand that you're something of value, and you use that positively, but then there's self-worth where you become obsessed with that I am the most important, and I am very important, and I am like it's all about me, right? Chametz portrays self-worth, conceit, even arrogance. Also connected, not exactly the same thing, but also represents understanding and logic, and we'll talk more about that soon. Meaning and taste. Matzah symbolizes humility, but it also implies a lack of understanding. The following texts expound on these two themes. So we're going to learn from short experts from two different ma'amarim, two different discourses, one from the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, and the one from the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad. So the source 5 is from Ora Torah. This is from page 974. Chametz and matzah are made of the same main ingredients, flour and water. What's the difference? Chametz rises while matzah remains flat. Chametz represents ego and matzah represents humility. Just a side note, somebody asked by the Seder that talking about matzah doesn't rise, if Mishnah doesn't rise, and he said, what do you mean? Dough doesn't rise, it's that yeast. Dough rises without yeast. Yeast speeds up the process. I'm sure Ellie can explain this. You mentioned something about the fermentation process.
Well, there's two ways to really get yeast. One is to have it already cultured,
Right.
And that, but in fact, most places where you have life forms, you have, along with a lot of other microorganisms, just ambient in the air, there's yeast, and you can accomplish any number of fermentation processes. So the sages marked it at 18 minutes. To where it would get wet. I mean, science might say a little different, but like that's a really good, lowball number so that something would not ferment. Just because if you leave flour and water out, eventually enough yeast will come from the air, and as there's enough heat, it will start to rise.
Exactly. All right. Thank you, Elliot. He does research.
I do a lot of fermenting
Yeah,
by
yeah.
experience.
Encyclopedia over there.
Yeah, just by the way, sourdough, it's flour and water. Okay. Okay, so chametz represents ego and matzah represents humility. Barry, can you read page 7, the difference?
The difference between chametz and matzah is chametz represents ego as expressed in the fact that it rises. Matzah represents humility in that it does not rise.
Okay, I want you also to read enlightenment versus simplicity in source 6.
This is the main difference between chametz and matzah. The bread of chametz, which has flavor, symbolizes a person's intellect, which likewise has a flavor. The bread of matzah, on the other hand, is called bread of the pauper. Lacking any flavor at all, it represents humility and nullification. That is why matzah is called bread of faith, because faith transcends reason.
Okay. There's an explanation I'm going to go through here to bring out these two ideas, but I just want to mention something first. One little point. So generally, people think of that the greatest person that can exist is the intellectual. Somebody who's incredibly smart and knowledgeable and with deep wisdom. That is the greatest human being that there can be. Somebody who's everything is by them in faith. It's not, they don't understand anything, they don't know anything, it's all faith. Oh, what can you do? This guy's an idiot. Well, he's like down the chain somewhere. I've heard recently people say that people back in the day, thousands of years ago, they believed in God. Why? Because they couldn't explain anything. They saw thunder. Oh, they saw lightning. Heard thunder. Sorry. They saw lightning. They saw volcanic eruptions. They heard earthquakes. The things were happening. They said this must be God. Nowadays we're smarter. Yeah. We look at the world. We understand how lightning works. We understand how thunder works. We understand how earthquakes happen. We understand how all these things work. So we don't.
Yeah, but we still can't explain dark matter.
Not yet, maybe we'll one day. But that's not why people believe in God. That's not it's I mean, the idea with that is that we didn't understand, so therefore we needed faith. Once we understand, faith is no longer necessary. In Torah and Chassidus, it's the exact opposite. Where understanding and logic and intellect can't go any further, faith can go higher than that. Where your brain understands, you understand more and more, and then at a certain point you go, I'm lost. I can't get any. Faith can reach higher than that. So let's see these two ideas about ego and understanding, and matzah being humility and faith. Okay, so we see that matzah and chametz represent two distinct methods of serving God. The first way is through humility, through nullification, which we would call matzah. The Jew serves his creator out of acceptance of the yoke of heaven. In Hebrew, we call that kabbalat ol. It does not matter whether he personally understands and feels the internal meaning of the commandment or not, nor whether he has an inner desire to fulfill it or not. The very fact that the creator commanded him to perform it causes him to fulfill the will of the creator, like a servant obeying his master. In this mode of service, the great virtue of absolute subservience to God is evident. Like a humble servant who just does as he's commanded.
What was that word? Kabbalah?
Kabbalat ol.
Kabbalah?
2 words. Kabbalat means acceptance of ol, the yoke.
The yoke?
Yoke, Y-O-L-K, or no, Y-O-K-E, sorry, not egg yolk. The yoke of heaven.
The yoke of heaven. That's actually in Sanskrit the direct translation of what the word yoga means.
Really?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, Kabbalat ol. So the second way is through understanding, chametz. The Jew learns Torah and fulfills commandments out of understanding and feeling, passion, excitement. He understands the greatness of God and the significance of the mitzvahs, and as a result, he has a desire to fulfill them, and therefore he serves his creator. What is the advantage of the second mode of service over simple dedicated service? Acceptance of divine authority through humility, self-nullification, does not elevate human beings so much. It leaves them where they are. Instead, it ignores their personality and inner drives, forcing them to behave according to the will of God, which is against their natural nature. What about intellect, emotion, and satisfaction? Have these faculties been purified and drawn closer to God? Not at all. The intellect doesn't understand why the commandment needs to be fulfilled. The emotion isn't drawn to the Torah and the mitzvahs, and the soul remains immersed in worldly matters. The person may have neutralized the influence of these faculties on their actions, not letting them interfere with serving God, but these faculties and tools themselves remain low and distant from God, just as they were before. In contrast, when a person incorporates his intellect, emotion, and enjoyment into this framework of serving God, when he understands the significance of the mitzvahs, feels an emotional desire to fulfill them, and gets satisfaction from them, he raises these faculties and uses them in his divine service. He's not shutting down his natural inclinations. He's transforming them and using them for good. A person who serves God in this manner becomes a different person. His intellect becomes refined. He's capable of understanding divine matters, comprehending the greatness of God and the significance of the mitzvahs. His heart feels an inner connection to the Torah and its commandments, and he possesses a love for God and fear of him. His enjoyment is found in holy matters. He has convinced himself in a deep and internal manner that he must engage in Torah mitzvahs, and now his own nature draws him there. In this mode of service, the absolute subservience of the person to God is not explicitly emphasized, but the refinement in serving God through understanding and emotion is highlighted. So we got that so far? So there's the idea of serving God out of obedience, out of faith, out of like a simple servant, and the idea of serving God out of understanding and passion and excitement. In Chassidus, it gives two different analogies for this. The difference between a child and a servant, a slave. Slave sounds too scary. Servant. When a master, a king, tells a servant to do something, the servant does it. Why does the king want it done? He has his reasons. What does the servant understand about that? Zilch. He does because he was told to. That's it. And there's a certain special quality there that the servant is just acting out of obedience, out of kabbalat ol, acceptance of the yoke of the master. In our case, it's the yoke of heaven. There's something very special about that, very powerful about that. On the other hand, the person's unrefined. They don't change. They don't grow. Serving God out of understanding. You understand what the significance of the mitzvahs are, why it's important to serve God, why the depth of Torah, and you appreciate the wisdom. You grow as a person, as a Jew. You're refined. You become less worldly. You become more. In Yiddish, the word is edel. I don't know how you say it. Edel in English. Edel is not delicate. It's more refined. Let's use the word refined.
What I love about the Jewish, like performing mitzvah, but also according to the Jewish calendar, there's all these different moments, and especially around this particular holiday season where there's waves of and then also in the high holy days where you hold back, whether it's eating some not eating chametz or fasting or intense prayer, you hold back, and there's like a delayed gratification followed by feasting and celebration, and you get both sides, and as you go on, it's just it's
It's an interesting thought.
really
I like that.
joyous, way to live.
Excellent. Okay. Give you something to think about now. Hopefully not during class though.
Fresh eyes.
We are going to touch on this idea briefly, but I want to just point out an important point. We're going to talk about this going from serving God with kabbalat ol, with acceptance of the yoke. You just do as you're told, out of faith, and you move on to growing and understanding and appreciating it. And there's something very important that needs to be said. We don't start off with obedience and acceptance of the yoke of heaven and doing things out of faith, and then move away from that to appreciating, understanding, and growing in that sense. We don't move away from that. We build off of it. It's a huge difference. Kabbalat ol, acceptance of the yoke of heaven, doing things as a simple servant, is the ultimate foundation of serving God. Without it, everything is on a shaky. There is no foundation. That is the foundation. So even when you're growing and you're developing and you're learning and you're understanding, you go, that's why it's important to do this mitzvah. You still, there's this in the background, there's a sense of, I'm doing this because God said so. There's additional reasons, there's things I can appreciate, there's things that I can understand, but the basis of it, I'm doing this because God told me to. So after learning about the idea of chametz and matzah in the service of God, as well as the two paths they symbolize, we can go on to understand why during the exodus from Egypt, we can only eat matzah, meaning Passover, we only eat matzah, whereas during Shavuot, it is permissible and even required to eat chametz, as we'll see momentarily. Okay, at the exodus from Egypt, the Israelites were in a low spiritual state. Shrek, read source 7 from Likutei Sichot, volume 1, page 8.
Verse 7, before the exodus from Egypt, the people of Israel were sunken in the 49 gates of impurity. They were not receptacles for godliness. As the verse says, they were naked and bare. God himself, the King of Kings, personally revealed himself and rescued them from Egypt. Since this was not a result of their own efforts, but merely a revelation from above, the experience didn't change them internally because they did not have the necessary capabilities. And it was only the revelation that drew them to God. When they left Egypt, they were not yet free from the evil inside them, as their animalistic soul was still in full swing.
Okay. Thank you. So since at the time of the exodus from Egypt, the children of Israel were immersed in impurity, as the Talmud relates that they served idols right alongside the Egyptians. Talk about it in a second. They were unable to completely and immediately transform themselves internally and depart from the impure way of life and thinking in which they were entrenched. Therefore, Hashem gave them a powerful experience that revealed the faith in their souls. And in one moment, he brought them out of Egypt. This revelation of divinity did not change their thoughts and character traits, but rather neutralized them with an excess of spiritual good, which affected at least their actions. This is the first type of service we mentioned earlier, nullification and dedication, which is symbolized by the matzah. Two things. The sages tell us that the redeeming factors that we had when leaving Egypt, in what merit were we able to leave Egypt, besides for God promising us that he would take us out? We had some redeeming qualities, which were, the sages tell us three things. That throughout the Egyptian exile, the Jews in Egypt did not change their dress, their manner of dress, their names, and their language. They kept their Jewish language, their Jewish dress, and their Jewish names. And so they say that Reuven and Shimon, Nachti, Reuven and Shimon Salki, which means that Reuven and Shimon, the first of the 12 tribes, they went down and they came up as Reuven and Shimon as well. They came up from Egypt. But there's a flip side to that. That those were their redeeming qualities, but there were no other redeeming qualities. They were sunken, as the sages tell us, they were sunken in the 49 gates of impurity. They were living like Egyptians.
Reuben and Shimon,
They were culturally Jewish, right?
So that's a pretty weird thing.
If like a guy named, I don't know, it's a good Jewish name, Yaakov. Yaakov walks into, a non-kosher bar, it's, sure, he's Yaakov, but it's a non-kosher bar. It's not the way you're supposed to act. And so that's that. And you see this highlighted also when the sages tell us that when we came to the Sea of Reeds, and the Egyptians were on our tail, they wanted to bring us back to Egypt. The sages tell us that the angels turned to God and said, and he commanded that the water should split. The angels turned to God and said, "These are idol worshippers, and these are idol worshippers. The Jews and the Egyptians. Why are you splitting the sea for them? What do they deserve it for?" So we were really in a low state. But when we were redeemed from Egypt, there was such a divine, godly revelation that it knocked our socks off. But it didn't change us. It didn't change us. We stayed who we were. We stayed in that low state, but it affected our actions. We started acting like Jews should, out of faith. That's matzah, Passover matzah, because we came out of Egypt, and this is what we had. We had nothing. We were rotten on the inside, in a sense, in regards to spiritual goodness going on inside of us, but we acted out of simple faith. So that's matzah, Passover. Okay.
But this was then in that time, it was the manna.
That was later.
Oh, that was later.
The manna happened after the giving of the Torah.
Oh, really?
Judge made a mistake. 1 second. The manna might have started before the giving of the Torah. I'll get back to you on that.
Because I know the manna stops appearing once they've reached the promised land.
Mm-hmm.
But it starts appearing like after the Sea of Reeds.
For sure after the Sefirat.
Okay.
I'm just trying to remember if it was before or after the giving of the Torah.
Yeah, the 40
Um,
days in the wilderness, I thought it was in that. Or when they were in the 40 years in the wilderness.
Well, yeah.
That's when they were, right, they were eating during that period. The question is when did it start?
Yeah. Was it before or after the giving of the Torah?
Uh,
Yeah.
40,
Okay.
So was it, are we saying that's it was during the counting of Omer or after? Or that's what we're wondering, when in the count did it?
And what significance would that have?
Well, because that was what was, how Hashem was sustaining all of the children of Israel. That whole
Right.
time. And that's what we, isn't that what, the challah, the.
You're saying this associated with chametz.
Yeah,
Well, it wasn't leavened bread. It wasn't, it was God made bread.
but they
It
made
was-
bread out of.
No,
the
no, it
leaven.
was, they ate it as it was. I mean, some of them would have grinded it, they didn't really bake it. But it fell from heaven, they ate it like that. I mean, like, it wasn't man-made, it wasn't leavened.
Mhm.
I think the spies came after the giving of the Torah, right? And
Yes,
they
after the
were
Torah.
there, And then that's when we got the 40-year.
Right, 40-year patch.
Yeah.
Okay. So after the counting of the Omer, the Jews were improved spiritually. Source A, Likutei Sichot, volume 22. However, Shavuot comes after the process of the counting of the Omer, during which we refine the 7 traits of the animal soul. At that point, I'll explain this in a second. At that point, chametz is no longer a contradiction to serving God. To the contrary, we then reach a state where the chametz can be, and therefore must be, utilized in our performance of Torah and mitzvahs. Therefore, on Shavuot, we are specifically commanded to bake chametz. So, a second, just let me give a brief explanation over here. We left Egypt. We got the Torah. Between those 2 points in time, there was 49 days. For 49 days, we knew where we were going. We knew we were going to the Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, to establish a true connection with God. We were off our rocker excited. You have no idea. The Jews were literally counting down the days till it happened. While doing so, they were also preparing themselves for the event. Not preparing themselves by, combing their hair and, taking a shower, nothing like that. They're preparing themselves internally, working on their character traits, being more kind, being, disciplined in a healthy way, and all the character traits that we might have, that they were working on those, they were refining those, they were uplifting themselves, which is exactly what we're talking about here. So therefore, nowadays, we also count the Omer. We count 49 days until the holiday of Shavuot. And each day there's a certain character trait that we're supposed to be working on and developing and growing in that sense. If you'd like to learn more, there's I'll show you. There's a little booklet here.
I've been very curious about that little booklet.
It's a very interesting booklet, written by Rabbi Simon Jacobson. You know who that is. He basically there's a certain character trait associated with each day, and he gives a little information and guidance of how to focus on refining that. It's in the library. So we refine the 7 traits of the animal soul. What's the animal soul? So the Alter Rebbe wrote a foundational book. This is the foundational work of Chabad philosophy called the Tanya. We mentioned it a couple of times. In Tanya, chapter 1, right at the beginning, the Alter Rebbe, you'll enjoy that. The Alter Rebbe lays out the internal makeup of a Jew. That we are raised to think that we have a soul, and it's not true. We don't have a soul. We have 2 souls. We're spiritually schizophrenic. Schizophrenic is a real problem, but I'm saying that with tongue in cheek.
We're bipolar.
It's not bipolar. Is
I'm bipolar.
I know, but we have 2 souls. We have it's an
Okay,
animal
actually,
soul.
really more like schizoaffective disorder for your. Yeah.
Jews are very cold people. It says animal soul, but I think the proper translation, animalistic soul. We have 2 souls. We have a soul that's the animalistic soul is what drives our bodily functions and our bodily desires, eating, sleeping, basic human functions. And it could also, it doesn't differentiate desire, eating a piece of corn, eating pizza, eating pork. It doesn't make a difference. Whatever tastes good. The godly soul that we each possess is as the author says, a chelek elokam mima'al mamish. It's a part of God above, literally. And every Jew possesses this, no matter what. As long as you're a Jew, you have this thing in you. And this soul, all it wants is a connection with God. That's all it wants through the Torah and mitzvahs. And there's this internal battle that we have. Some people, should I do the mitzvah? Should I not do the mitzvah? For some others who are not thinking in those words, it could be Jewish guilt. You really shouldn't have done that. If you enjoyed doing it and you did it, why are you feeling guilty about it? Because there's two of you inside you. And it's a fascinating, it's an important discussion to have and to learn about. So I'd suggest you read Tanya. I think they were supposed to send it to us, but we didn't get it yet. Okay, whatever. We're supposed to get an English Tanya. So during the
that was just really great. The explanation of Jewish guilt while showing it like.
Listen, we can all relate. I mean,
Yeah.
So during the Omer period, the Omer counting period, the 49 days, 7 weeks, we're refining the 7 character traits of the animalistic soul. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Whether we're doing it actually or not, that's the theme of the time. So after the counting of the Omer, on page 9, after the counting of the Omer, chametz can be a mitzvah. So our personalities, our egos start becoming something that should be dealt with in a positive sense. To use our brains, to use our emotions, to get ourselves involved. Your ego, which was so awful just a couple weeks ago, Passover, now you're working to bring that and make it into a tool to serve God. Therefore, on Passover, when the people of Israel left Egypt, chametz was prohibited. They had simplistic faith. They were humble and faithful, but they were internally empty. And therefore, their intellect, their chametz, was not yet in a desirable state. Only on Shavuot, after the proper completion of the counting of the Omer and refinement of the inner character traits, is the intellect made holy, and then chametz can be made into a mitzvah. This doesn't mean if you didn't refine yourselves over the Omer period, you can't eat bread on Shavuot. It's still a reality. You can still eat bread and still commandment to make the bread for the temple. But the physical actions are reflecting a deeper reality that we're supposed to be focusing on. A story to bring out a certain point over here. In 1985, there was a bitter dispute regarding the ownership of the Chabad library of the previous Rebbe. One of his heirs claimed that the library was private property of the previous Rebbe and his family, and should therefore be divided among all the heirs, including himself. On the other hand, Chabad argued that the library was not private property, but rather belonged to the movement and the community of Hasidim, and therefore should remain in the movement's possession. This issue was argued in court, and after a long legal battle, the courts ruled in 2 separate judgments that the library belonged to the movement and therefore should remain in its possession. I'm sure Barry can study the case and tell us all the legalities. During one of the earlier meetings that the Rebbe held with the Chabad's attorneys, he instructed them to defend their argument with a letter from the previous Rebbe, in which the previous Rebbe declared openly that the books were the public property of the movement. The Rebbe said that this was the main argument that would tip the scales in their favor. At the end of the meeting, the Rebbe said that he did not want the attorneys to act on this line of reasoning only because he said so, but rather because they truly understood. The Rebbe did not want the attorneys to act out of blind obedience, but to bring all their experience, insight, and skills to the table. This would only happen if they were convinced of and understood the Rebbe's argument, and that they could advance it with their expertise and experience in courts. So the same applies in serving God. He does not want us to perform mitzvahs merely, and I emphasize the word merely, out of obligation or duty. He desires that we be convinced in our hearts and minds of the importance and correctness of Torah mitzvahs, for only then can we serve him with all of our faculties and strengths. Again, highlighting the word merely because doing mitzvahs out of obligation or duty is the foundation, it's the bedrock of serving God. Okay. Section C, a personal journey. Ellie, can you read the section leaving Egypt every day?
Oh, this is like a recurring Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
In our day, we do not physically offer the sacrifice of the 2 loaves, but it is still relevant to our soul's spiritual journey during those 3 periods. Our sages said, in every generation, a person must view himself as if he left Egypt today. We must always strive to escape the constraints of our body and animal soul, leaving Egypt in a spiritual sense.
So the journey out of Egypt is also our personal journey. Hasidic philosophy explains that the word Mitzrayim, which is the word for Egypt in Hebrew, is from the root Meitzar, which means a boundary or a narrow limit, constraint. Every person has their own Mitzrayim, limitations that restrict and hinder them from being who they truly are. These limitations include habits, patterns of thought, desires, environments, and so on. All of these constrict and limit an individual, even attempting to divert them to a different path. They do not allow one's real inner godly self to express itself fully. We are obligated to leave Egypt, to release oneself from, to release ourselves from our own limitations and constraints, to become who we truly should be, a good person who wishes to do good for those around them, and fulfill the Torah and its mitzvahs. A person must free their soul from its chains and enable it to find its true expression through sincere prayer, fulfilling mitzvahs, and doing good for others with warmth, etc. Now, just a little rule, an important point. Everything in the, so I mentioned this before, there's the body of Torah and the soul of Torah. The body of Torah is the legalities of Torah, the rules of Torah, the laws of Torah, and the discussions behind those. There's the soul of Torah as well, just like a person has a body and a soul. The Torah also has a body and a soul. The soul of Torah is the deeper dimension of Torah, the mystical teachings, which give life and vitality to the performance of mitzvahs and the learning of Torah and serving God. So what we just said is from the soul of Torah, that's Mitzrayim, Egypt, also represents limitations and constrictions. But just like body and soul are linked in such an intense way, in such an ultimate way that you can't really separate between body and soul when a person is hopefully living and breathing, body and soul are inseparable. So too, in the Torah, body and soul are inseparable, meaning that you can see in the body of Torah and the legalities of Torah and the laws of Torah, you can see the right set of glasses, you can see the soul of Torah as well. So just a quick example on this. The verse says about the future redemption. Like the days of your leaving Egypt, the prophet says to the Jewish people, like the days of your leaving Egypt, I will show the Jewish people wonders. Okay, it's talking about the Messianic era. But it says like the days of your leaving Egypt. How many days did it take to leave Egypt? Remind me. One. Yeah. It was one day. We left the middle of the day and it was one day. It was within a couple of hours. Why did I say like the days, plural, of your leaving Egypt? So you see already here, there's something deeper here that's not so apparent on the surface. The deeper explanation is every day from the time we left Egypt till today, 2023, we're leaving Egypt. All those days. This is the basis of that's the basis of this idea that we have an obligation to leave Egypt every single day of our lives. Leave our constraints and limitations and things holding us back from being the best Jew that we can be. The basis of divine service, simple acceptance. Barry, can you read page 10? We do so.
We do so in the following order. At the outset, corresponding to the actual exodus from Egypt on Passover, chametz should not be consumed, meaning we should not scrutinize everything from an intellectual viewpoint. Our personal perspective might be skewed. Instead, focus on humility and accepting the yoke of God. That is something that transcends intellect. This idea is applicable not only at the onset of our general journey, Judaism, but in every situation that can be considered a beginning. For our sages said, in every generation, meaning in every situation, a person must view himself as if he left Egypt today. Therefore, this approach applies to every situation. Focus less on your own perspective, as we said earlier. Even righteous people need to strive to escape their limitations. However, once you leave your Egypt, your constraints and limitations, chametz is no longer prohibited. Even if you cannot fully transform it to holiness, you cannot fully transform. At that point, it is time to focus on your internal character and intellect, your personal chametz, and align it with your spiritual journey.
All right, thank you, Barry. So, in other words, the basis of divine service is acceptance of God's authority. That is to say, a person cannot expect to first understand the reasons for the mitzvahs and wait for inspiration and excitement. One can only focus on the act itself, doing it because God commanded so. An analogy would be a person who goes to a doctor and complains about a specific malady, and the doctor prescribes a specific medication. Would the patient say to the doctor, "Whoa, 1 second, doc, explain to me what this pill is made out of and exactly how and why it works, and only then I'll take the pill"? Obviously, that's not the right way. The person's ill, they need to take the pill. The patient does not have the required knowledge and time to understand all the nuances and complexities of the treatment. He must take the pill in obedience to the doctor, and in the future, he can go learn medicine and understand why and how that pill helps. It's the same thing with serving God. When a person is just starting out on their path, they cannot expect to first understand the why and have a feeling of love for God, and only then fulfill the mitzvahs and learn the Torah. They're not there yet. The first step is to accept the authority and obligation of the Torah and to do what is necessary just because God commanded it. The concept that one needs to start with Kabbalat Ol, with acceptance of the yoke of heaven, and only later reach a deeper understanding that penetrates the heart and mind, doesn't only apply in the general spiritual journey of life, but also to every time we rise to a higher level or embark on a new journey to discover something deeper. The beginning of that personal journey needs to be with Kabbalat Ol, and only then can we ascend further. Michael, can you read the completion of divine service, intellectual and emotional connection?
The final goal is when you reach a state in which you can and therefore must bring your hametz, your intellect, to become a part of your spiritual journey and a vessel for godliness, transforming it entirely. I'm sorry, I'm reading today.
Okay.
This is the advantage of Chabad Hasidic philosophy. Instead of making do with external inspiration, it gives the individual his own path to God, making his mind and heart are receptible for godliness.
Perfect. After a person gets accustomed to the idea of Kabbalat Ol, acceptance of the yoke, in their daily life, only then can they also start mixing in enthusiasm in their divine service, based on their nature and character. Not only is one able to do so, but they're obligated to do so, because work that is done solely with Kabbalat Ol, with acceptance of the yoke, without any emotional expressions or elevated experiences, is not enough and does not penetrate every aspect of a person's existence. This logical progression is a major condition for healthy and balanced living as a Jew. At the beginning of one's spiritual efforts, at the beginning of the journey out of Egypt, it is forbidden to eat chametz. One must not wait for understanding and feeling. The basis is accepting God's authority. Only later in one's spiritual journey is one commanded to eat chametz, meaning to ensure that their understanding and character understand and adapt to God's will as well. Serving God with nullification and subservience is the type of work required during Passover, at the beginning of the journey of the people of Israel. Therefore, they ate matzah, which symbolizes humility, nullification. But the Jew cannot be satisfied with that. They must continue to work of the work of counting the Omer, to work on themselves and refine their character traits. Thus, they progress to the holiday of Shavuot, where the type of service required of them is intellectual understanding and emotional feeling. And then the commandment is to bring a new offering, the chametz of the individuality and essence of the human soul. This last thing that Michael just read, the advantage of Chabad Hasidic philosophy, we need to give a context to that. So this brief sentence references a clash of ideas between the Hasidic discipline of Chabad and other Hasidic disciplines. So let's read a little more about that with the following excerpts from a different talk of the Rebbe. And I might give some background, but sure, can you read source 9?
Okay, source 9. It is known that the students of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mizrach forged various distinct paths, which were generally split into two categories: the philosophy of the Hasidic communities of Poland. The verse states the righteous person lives by his faith, and can be interpreted to read gives life by his faith. This means that the study of the esoteric parts of Torah was performed by the righteous spiritual leader and by his faith, meaning through trusting in and following him. His followers were enlightened, and all they needed to do was the practical aspect of divine service. The study and understanding of the Rebbe was enough for them. The philosophy of Chabad Hasidism, which rejects the previous approach and instead requires everyone to themselves study the esoteric meaning behind Judaism, principle of Chabad thought.
Okay. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, who introduced Hasidism into the world. Hasidus. His successor was known as the Maggid of Mizrich. Maggid literally means a preacher, but it wasn't a preacher. The Maggid of Mizrich had a number of students. These people were spiritual giants. They were holy people, they were righteous people, they were each in their own right. And they all served God in the Hasidic way of life, the Hasidic manner. One of those students was the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement. After the Maggid of Mizrich passed away, the students went on this mission of teaching the Hasidic philosophy to Jews throughout the region, which was what the mission that the Maggid of Mizrich entrusted them to do, and to continue doing it. There came a point where the Alter Rebbe introduced his take on this philosophy. He in their eyes, he changed it radically, and it became a huge rift among a lot of them. A number of them actually sided with him, but a large amount of them were very against his. They thought he went off the path of what their teacher had taught. The basic differences, as we just finished reading, is there's a lot of Hasidic groups, but the Chabad Hasidic group is very different relative to all of them. The difference is, in both groups, there's a leader, there's a Rebbe, and there are followers, there's Hasidim, who learn from the Rebbe. But by the other Hasidic groups, it's almost as if the Rebbe is saying, follow me, and you'll be good. You know, go down come with me down the street, come with me down this journey. I'm going on this journey, grab onto me, you'll be good. I've got a fire burning. You want to come? You want to be warm? Come close to me. In Chabad, it's very different. It's a similar idea, but very different. Which is that in Chabad, the Rebbe says, this is the path you need to go on. Not, I'm going down the path, tag along with me. No, this is the path you need to go on. I'm going to show you how you go on this path. I've got a fire. You need a fire too. Here's a match. I'll teach you how to light the match, light your own fire. And there's a huge difference. In Chabad, serving God in a real internal manner becomes personal. You're not relying on somebody else who's holier and loftier than you to schlep you up and pull you closer to God. The Rebbe is instructing you and teaching you and educating you how you can do this yourself. Let's leave it at that. Okay, so that's a nice class. The difference between chametz and matzah, humility and ego, faith and understanding, and we have to develop. We have to grow from over our journeys to grow from a place of accepting the yoke of heaven to that we do what Hashem wants with no questions asked. No matter what you say, we'll do it. Even if I don't understand, if it's contrary to my understanding, still going to do it. And to build off of that, not to leave that, to build off of that, to develop and to grow and understand and learn more and to educate ourselves and to refine ourselves till we experience joy and passion in serving God and we feel love of God and fear of God. Any questions? Yeah.
Silly question.
No silly questions.
So I'm doing just the very, just the word prayer. How long would it take the average person to just walking in the door a couple months ago? How long does it take before I would start to feel that joy? Because that's what I'm craving right now. Is the understanding. I mean, I'm sure it's different for everybody.
Okay, let's say it like this. I knew somebody. I was in Israel for a year, and there was a convert who came to the yeshiva, the study, the school that I was in. He converted to Judaism relatively recently. Before that, I think it was a couple weeks. Young guy, maybe he was 20 something. And he was very broken about something. What was he broken about? He was very intense and very excited about becoming Jewish. And the conversion process is not easy. It's not short. There's no shortcuts, and it could be hard. And he did it. And he was hoping, he was waiting for the moment that he's going to become Jewish. He's going to have a Jewish soul. He's going to go to the Kotel, the Western Wall, and he's going to feel this connection. He's going to feel this incredible spiritual experience. He went to the wall. You know what he felt? Nothing. Zero. He was very broken about that. But there's an important point here, which is Judaism is not about emotions. I know we just finished saying that it is, and there's an important point, but just hear me out. It's not about emotions. It's not about spiritual experiences. Okay? It's not about getting on a high. It's about being a good Jew. It's about doing the right thing, doing the mitzvahs, learning the Torah, doing what God wants of us, fulfilling the mission that He entrusted us. It's important to grow and to not just stay there, as we just finished learning. It's important to develop feelings for Hashem and love for God, and to get excited about these things because you understand the importance of them. If you wait for a spiritual experience to happen, it's not going to happen. But the more you learn, the more you grow, the more you do. So that's an important point. The more you do, the more mitzvahs you do, and on top of that, you're learning and you're appreciating what you're learning, you're appreciating what you're doing. You will start to feel, I love this. I love this connection I have with God. It's so personal, so intimate. But it's real. What does it mean it's real? It will have ups and downs. This is just like any relationship. In a marriage, things are not smooth sailing. Smooth sailing exists in movies and in romance novels. That's not reality. Reality, there could be bumps. There could be things are passionate. Things are incredible. Things feel dull. Things feel cold. That's the reality. So the more you learn, the more you learn about the mitzvahs. You learn, and as you're doing them, because if just learning without the doing is you're missing the point, and you're not going to feel anything. But your goal isn't to feel. That's what I'm trying to get at. Your goal is not to feel. Your goal is to be the best Jew that you can be by acting and learning. It sounds very unsatisfying. I'm waiting for this, godly revelation.
I was hoping by the end of May.
Let's put it down on the calendar. But that's not the goal. We can talk more about this, but I think we'll wrap up.
I keep telling you, Michael, just get yourself a Siddur, a Hasidic prayer book.
Yeah.
Get one.
I need to write these things down because
It's all written down in the prayer book. It's great.
Yeah, but what I mean is I need to write down what you think I need to.
Well, no, that's it. Just that.
Yeah.
Just W. Do you have one for you?
Prayer book.
Needs to buy one, and that's what I'm saying. That keep doing mitzvot out of there on a daily basis, and then